work begins. And speaking of ethics, we are really honored to have as your lecturer now, Professor Brooke Ellison, who has been teaching and actually came up with a concept of holistic ethics in engineering. And Professor Ellison will lecture to you today. And in addition to that, she will be forming groups. And with the help of Jessica, Jessica is our webmaster for online journals here that have a Library of Congress number that are peer reviewed. And last year, Jessica Guo, one of the students, actually 2 years ago, and again last year, Jessica Guo started an online ethics journal, which is peer reviewed. And this year again, they will be publishing another issue of this journal under the guidance of Dr. Ellison and Jessica Hoffler's help. Okay, so now I'll give you Dr. Ellison.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you so much, Dr. Prof, for having me come to present again to the Garcia program. So just so you know, as Dr. Rafaelovich mentioned, I have been involved in the Garcia program for many years now, probably going on about 10 years now. And I typically do a lecture on ethics, and it is always such a pleasure, right? So ethics has a deep importance and resonance with me and some of the work that I've done over the years and issues that I've cared about. This is actually the first year that I've been back in the classroom since the pandemic to do this in person. So it is just such a thrill to be back and to see all your faces and to hear from you. So I'm going to start by saying that this is going to be a very interactive session. I want to hear from as many of you as I possibly can. You can stop to ask questions. I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, and I want to get your thoughts and your insights on a lot of these issues. Ethics is, by its very nature and by its definition, kind of an issue of debate, a source of debate where there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to ethics, but you need to have a position that you can justify and back it up with evidence. We'll talk about what that means in a little bit. So how I came to this question and why I've been so deeply involved in ethics is for many years, I've been deeply involved in stem cell research and what stem cell research is all about, what its potential is for biomedical treatments and the future of medicine. And so I'm not a practicing scientist. I live with quadriplegia, ventilator-dependent quadriplegia. And because of that, I can't move my arms, but I care deeply about this science as I do about many different disciplines of science. And I wanted to make sure that stem cell researchers and other scientists had as clear a path forward as they possibly could when it came to making biomedical advances. Many of you may know a bit about the controversy or the circumstances around stem cell research. I know it kind of predates your birth, but when this research was kind of at its most prominent or at its most socially controversial, there was a lot of debate going on about what this science was all about and whether or not we should pursue it as a country. And I cared very deeply about making sure that the science could move forward. So I became deeply involved in helping to create a path forward for stem cell scientists. I sat on the ethics committee of what was called the Empire State Stem Cell Board, right? So this funding mechanism housed within New York State that would allow for funding for embryonic stem cell research and adult stem cell research to move forward. And they wanted this funding mechanism to be guided by some ethical principles, some framework to make it more palatable and make it acceptable for society. And that's largely what ethics kind of focuses on. And we'll talk about what that means. So I came at this question from a stem cell research vantage point, but ethics applies to all avenues of science. So as you guys move ahead on your projects, this is something I want you to keep in your minds, in the back of your heads, and in your thought processes as you tackle different questions. Okay, so let's jump into it. So I mentioned the word ethics probably about 20 times in just the past 5 minutes. But what is ethics? What do you guys think ethics is? Yeah. Fantastic. What's right and what's wrong? Excellent. Who wants to build off of that? Or does that seem like we basically have a good definition? Yes. Excellent, right? So in this addition to what was just said, right, there's some kind of action component to it, right? It's not just like a flat out assessment of what's right or wrong, but it has some action associated with it. Excellent. Yes, right there in the middle. Excellent. All right. So what seemed like a pretty simple issue, right? As we think about it, as we kind of articulate it a little bit more, right? There's a little bit more meatiness to it, right? There's maybe a few more things that we need to think about. Excellent. Right. So you're all touching on this, right? So ethics is a branch of philosophy that helps us to determine what's right and what's wrong, right? Just as was said. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. Go back. So who thinks they're ethical? Who thinks you're ethical? How many of you think you are? Good. I mean, it's good to raise your hand. I mean, I hope that many of you do. You don't need to be shy about it. All right, so we have like maybe a quarter of you saying that you're ethical. So I guess the rest of you who does not think you're ethical, and I'd like to know why. All right, so one hand shot up like so quickly. All right, so you in the front, why do you think you are not ethical?
Okay.
Yes.
Because I am sometimes malicious.
Oh, you're sometimes malicious. All right. Okay, so we have some honesty coming out. Okay. All right. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. You kicked off the conversation, so keep going. Keep it coming.
I think at some level, everyone. Oh. Thank you. I think at some level we all do something unethical, whether that's through some method of consumption. So like, let's say this laptop, at some level there was probably something unethical happening, whether it's child labor or the place that they source the material.
Oh, interesting. Wow, getting deep into the weeds of philosophy. Okay, all right. So yes, okay, they're in the middle again.
I guess my great presence is unethical because I'm contributing to overpopulation.
Jeez, all right, you guys are very hard on yourselves. All right, my very existence is unethical. Okay, all right, so we're talking about overconsumption and a global population that is reaching a teetering point. All right, so even though you had nothing to do with your presence here, you're gonna that's a tight standard to hold yourself to, but I understand what you're saying. Yes, right there.
I think maybe you could consider everyone ethical by the same definition because everybody follows their own, I guess, philosophical framework, and in their minds that is ethical for them. So everybody is ethical.
All right, let me just ask another question. You guys are all high school students, right? I mean, you guys are approaching this question from a very, very mature perspective, right? These are really insightful and well articulated ways of looking at a very complex question, right? It's often the case that when you ask somebody, "Are you ethical?" They just say, "Yes, obviously, of course. I do the right thing. I try to recycle, right? I don't lie that often, right? That kind of thing." They think that they're basically ethical, but there are a lot of other things that we need to take into account before we can make such a quick decision. Okay, so we started this conversation by saying that ethics largely revolves around what's right and what's wrong, choosing between what's right and what's wrong. But wait a second. Sometimes what's right for one person is not what's right for another person. So how do we determine what's right and what's wrong? This kind of touches on the point that was just made. Yes. Oh, the impact that it has. Okay, all right. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. Absolutely. So that's a very important concept to be thinking about, especially as we talk about things like sustainability and things like social justice, which we'll come to later on in the lecture. Yes. Okay, so I missed a little bit of what you said, but I think I got the general gist. Hold on.
Or instead of considering impacts, you can also live by a set of rules of right or wrong, which you consider to be correct, no matter what, regardless of what the impacts are.
Okay, excellent. So this is kind of a little bit beyond the scope of this particular lecture, but I often talk about this very thing because I wanted to make sure we had enough time to talk about, larger societal and scientific issues. But where do we get those codes of conduct from? Where do we get that sense of morality? Right, that's basically what that is called. Where does that come from? Where do we get that from? There in the back first, yeah. They're in like the navy blue shirt. Right. Yeah. All right. We'll just go around in a circle.
That guy back there with the glasses?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Get your exercise for the day here. Yeah. Getting all your steps in.
I mean, to be fair, Immanuel Kant kind of assumes that we kind of get a moral framework. We can derive a moral framework for pure reason. That to some extent, because we can acknowledge that all humans are capable of reasoning and have their own conscience and so forth, that you can kind of derive some kind of deontological framework. But these are obviously arguments from different people.
Wow. All right. So jumping right into Immanuel Kant and deontological ethics. Wow. I mean, so that is definitely a very mature response to this, right? So there are different ethical frameworks that have been created or thought through by thinkers who precede all of us, right? People like philosophers like Immanuel Kant or thinkers like John Locke, who approach these questions from different philosophical vantage points and have put together frameworks that we can use to help think through about what is right or what's wrong. But we get our sense of morality basically by being parts of society, right? From our parents, from our teachers, from our places of worship, just being parts of society, we get a general sense of what's right and what's wrong. All right, so who could tell me who this handsome guy is? All right. I think most of you can identify this, or let's get on the count of three, identify who he is. 1, 2, 3. Thanos, that's right. Okay, so why might he be important to this conversation? What was he looking to do? What was his overall objective? I'm hearing some muttering. Who wants to come out and say it? Right.
Wanted to reduce population here.
Okay, so this is by half, exactly. So this touches very centrally on the point that you just made before, right? So Thanos was concerned about the fate of universal existence, how we were degrading the universe. There was not going to be resources available for not just people, but for creatures of all kinds around the galaxy, around the universe. And his solution was to do what? Right? To snap, right? What was going to happen when he snapped his fingers? Half the population vanish, right? So so is that right? Or is that wrong? Go for it.
I think it was it could be considered wrong because he was not choosing between two options. I'm not sure. I don't know that much about Marvel, but it feels like he was using the lives of half the population to benefit the other half. And the fact that he used their lives and not really chose between two options, I think could be considered wrong.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's a very well thought out and very well reasoned. All right, so all the way in the back, the guy in the white shirt there in the back. I want to make sure that we get to all sides of the classroom.
I don't think he was necessarily wrong. It was more the method, rather. I think
Mhm.
if you try to get rid of everything in an instant, yes, it's a quick solution, but it deprives the rights of that half to have their lives. If you want to control the population, if you want to handle that, that's different. You can handle it in a slow manner that would maybe through like laws and stuff like that, but you can't just snap away half of people. They, you know, if you do it in a controlled manner, I feel like that would be more fair, like to get having like people like birth control, minimum number of children, stuff like that, but not snapping away half of society.
Right. So his objective was justified, but not the process. Right. That's essentially what you're saying. Which I mean, it's a valid point, right? That maybe he has an objective that is valuable and ethical, but the process by which the achievement of that make sure everybody can hear each other. Okay, just 2 more points and then we'll keep going.
I mean, he could have totally killed them slowly, but I don't think that would have made much of a difference. But what's it called? I think you can argue that it's objectively wrong to kill people, especially considering the way he did it was in a very paternalistic way. There was no other input considered. And so I think that also changes his decision, like the sheer paternalism of his decision and killing half the population without, you know, as a single, he really played God, which I think makes his decision that much more unethical.
All right, so there's the paternalism issue, right? The people didn't have any say. They didn't have any what's called autonomy in whether or not this decision was made on their behalf, right? People were being essentially annihilated or executed without any consent to that, right? This sits at the heart of the entire bioethical movement, this issue of autonomy and who has consent over who lives and who does not. Who can tell me a major issue in history when this very issue became very prominent? Go for it. Sure. Yeah, that's happened many times, especially to people with disabilities, people of color. It happened in any instance of genocide, the Holocaust, primary among them, right? That was the point at which thinking in terms of bioethics changed completely, right? Who has the right to say who is going to be studied, who is going to be killed, who's going to be made sick, and who does not? All right, so 1 more point and then we'll move ahead.
Sorry, just on the last thing, and I think like the HeLa, like the stem cell line was also really interesting.
Sure.
Too. But I think like from any perspective, even if you look at it from like a purely utilitarian perspective, I mean, at least like half the people, you know, their outcome wasn't better. It's just like a total like nil outcome. So there was definitely some better approach if you really considered this to be such a huge issue.
All right. So getting deeper into this conversation, right? So this is the use of cells that were obtained from somebody without her consent, without her family's consent, that have been studied and have generated mass, enormous amounts of wealth for biomedical companies, pharmaceutical companies, not to the benefit of the family themselves or the people who who the sources of these cells, right? So we can look at this from what's called the utilitarian perspective, which is kind of the counterpoint to the deontological perspective, which we mentioned before, and I'll get into that a little bit more deeply in a minute. But what it comes down to is there are different ways of looking at these questions that could generate different outcomes, different conclusions about whether or not something is right or wrong. All right, so we touched on this just a minute ago. Morality is basically our sense of what's right and wrong. Right? These are the things that guide our behavior, right? They're based in the relationships we have with each other and designed so people can live harmoniously, right? So we're not, warmongering all the time, stealing from each other. It protects an overall quality of life based on the things that we all believe we should and shouldn't do. So what are some of these things that we believe in? Just as part of members of society, what are the things we think we should not do? Yes. There, the white shirt.
Like stealing from someone is wrong.
Absolutely. All right. We have a general sense that stealing from somebody is wrong. Okay, what else?
Like don't kill each other.
Don't kill each other. Absolutely, right? A pretty basic one, right? We would not be able to function as a society if we did not agree that killing each other is wrong. Let's get two more.
Got another hand up.
Some sense of like not infringing upon other people's rights, like protecting your own and then letting the other people's have their own.
All right. So the general belief that people can define their own lives, right? That you can live your life and that somebody else can live his or her or their own lives without interference from other people. Yes, one more.
Maybe not breaking certain laws.
Sure, absolutely, right. So laws themselves are acts of morality, right? They're kind of representations of things that we think are right and wrong, what we should and we should not do. Absolutely, right? That's where stealing comes into play. That's where not killing people comes into play, right? All of these things that we think are general codes of conduct, they are borne out in things like the laws that we create, the books that we use for religious principles, religious practice, right? All of these things become representations of what's right and what's wrong. And we learn them from our teachers, from our parents, from just being parts of society. So morality is basically what keeps societies moving forward, right? Keeps people moving towards virtuous behaviors, or at least they're supposed to. Now, ethics is a little bit different, right? Ethics is not purely what's right and what's wrong. It digs a little bit deeper than that. It says, why is this situation right? Or is this situation wrong? Right? It takes that question and it goes a little bit farther to understand why we believe something is right or something is wrong and why. So ethicists analyze issues that challenge our sense of what's right and what's wrong. And these are sometimes, not all the time, but oftentimes revolve around duties that people have to perform in their professions, in their responsibilities, in their positions in the world, as a parent, as a student, as a physician, as a lawyer. Right, a lot of our work a lot of our responsibilities fall into categories depending on the kinds of work that we do and the kinds of behaviors we perform on a regular basis. All right, so this is a bit of an example of what's going on in these two pictures. What's going on in the picture on the left? Surgery, absolutely. Surgery. Now, what typically happens when somebody's performing surgery? What's that?
Cancer.
Of course, of course. Why? Cut them open, exactly. You cut them open, you're taking out their organs, moving stuff around, right? And that is not a responsibility or a duty we would allow just about anybody to perform, right? You need to have certain credentials, certain kinds of duties associated to the job you're performing in order for that to be okay. What's going on in the right picture?
The war zone and it looks like someone is dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly, right? We're in a battlefield. What are soldiers tasked to do? What privilege do they have?
They can kill people.
Can kill people, exactly. Things that we abjectly believe are wrong, right? Like hurting somebody, like cutting somebody open, we give permission to in certain circumstances. Things like killing people, we have a general belief under certain circumstances that's an okay thing to do. And of course, there are some who believe that, under all circumstances, that is an absolutely immoral thing to do, an unethical thing to do. But generally, the general belief in the population is that under certain circumstances, what we believe is right and wrong has some wiggle room to it. Okay, so some of the things that help to guide the decisions that we make without getting too deep into philosophical perspectives and frameworks, things like deontologism, or things like utilitarianism, or things like virtue ethics or justice principles, right? Like those would be for a deeper conversation, a conversation that would go beyond just the confines of this hour. But there are principles that help to guide our behavior, things that we have talked about already that help to guide the decisions that we make, to make them more ethical, to make them less detrimental. And when we understand these principles, we can apply them to the decisions that we make. So the first one would be, who benefits from the decisions that we make, right? This was mentioned before. What is the impact? Am I just going to be benefiting myself, or is there some greater impact that we need to know about? Is there a greater social benefit for the things that I'm doing? Right, that touches on the second point as well, right? So we're making any kind of policy decision, scientific decision. What is the overall impact? How are future generations or people around the world going to benefit or be impacted by the decisions that we make? Beneficence, right? That should sit at the heart of a lot of the decisions that we make to help those who are in need, right? Oftentimes we make decisions without that as a core principle. Paternalism, right? This is a point that was raised before. Are we being paternalistic or making decisions on behalf of other people without knowing what their lives are actually like, right? Acting like a father, that's what paternalism means, right? For those of you who study Latin, pater means father, right? So acting like a parent, acting like you know what somebody else wants for his or her life, making decisions on their behalf. That happens very frequently in medicine. It happens in international development. Non-maleficence, right? This is another core principle, core ethical principle. This is kind of the flip side of beneficence, right? So beneficence is to actually do good. Non-maleficence is to not do harm, right? So these are kind of like two sides of the same coin, right? Non-maleficence says that you can't hurt people. Beneficence says not only can you not hurt people, but you actually have to help them. Honesty, right? Being transparent, right? Veracity, being honest and truthful. being lawful, abiding by the principles that we have set up as a society. Autonomy, right? This is the flip of paternalism, right? Allowing people to make their own decisions, acknowledging that people have their own rights and their own freedoms to make decisions. Justice, right? Allowing people to have their own rights to due process, knowing that people live with different advantages and privileges over other people, and a human rights perspective, understanding people's fundamental human rights. Okay, so applied ethics, that's largely what I focus a lot of my time on, right? Because there has been centuries of philosophical thinking that looks at things almost in the abstract, right? General ways of approaching complex questions, right? Frameworks that we could use to pick apart questions. What I focus on is the ways in which these things are actually impacting people's lives. Right, so if we're talking about medical ethical questions, like what are the lived experiences that people are having right now that we need to start thinking about, that maybe just having conversations from a philosophical vantage point are missing, right? So things like health disparities, right? Or who is going to be disproportionately affected by things like the pandemic or by some kind of construction initiative. Right, so actually thinking about whose lives are impacted, how these questions apply to people's lives. Who can think of some more examples of what an applied ethical question might look like or might be?
Animal testing.
Excellent, excellent, fantastic, fantastic. A very big issue in medical ethics.
Abortion or euthanasia.
Absolutely. So this touches on the question, right? So we have a general belief that we should not kill, right? But then when we dig a little bit more deeply, what about in situations like physician aid in dying or abortion? Where do we stand on this? Absolutely.
Affirmative action.
Sure. Expand on that a little bit.
Like it benefits populations that are directly or that are less fortunate than others, but the people who are more fortunate feel discriminated against because
Absolutely.
and it's just really complicated.
It's really complicated. Exactly. All of these issues are really complicated. Absolutely. But yeah, so affirmative action, depending on what philosophical perspective you could take, you could arrive at very different opinions on whether or not you think that's right from a justice standpoint, right? On knowing that people approach college or the workplace from very different starting points. From that vantage point, it allows us to say, wait a second, maybe we need to give some people different attention as opposed to others. Absolutely.
Environmental impact versus technological progress.
Oh, excellent, right? So we are dealing with that very prominently right now as AI develops, and we have cars that emit certain things. Absolutely fantastic.
Like where to construct like affordable housing or homeless shelters or something of that sort that'll like decrease the property value.
Excellent. You guys are nailing it. Absolutely. These are exactly the kinds of issues that come out of ethics, right? So ethics often deals with high level questions, but this applies to really on the ground lived experiences and policies that we create, decisions that we make as members of society that impact people's lives in different ways. Okay, one more, then we'll go ahead.
Human autonomy versus the growth of artificial intelligence.
Wow. Okay. All right. So these are all points that we'll kind of come back to in just a minute, but absolutely. These are really important and complex questions. All right. So really quickly, why do we need to have ethics in the sciences? And what is the risk of not having ethics? You guys are carrying the conversation over here. Let's see if we can get some more voices in the conversation, but go ahead.
taking responsibility for one's inventions and the power that comes with science.
Oh, wow. All right. Fantastic. Fantastic.
Making sure that life isn't misused in pursuit of science. So like there's many examples of cases in which, like, for example, during the Nazi trials, even in Japan, things like that, where human life was grossly misused in the pursuit of better technology.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. There was the white shirt, and then a couple of rows back there.
Yeah, like when even more recently, when we don't like consider ethical implications, people, offer ideas that are, very similar to something like eugenics or other related fields.
Excellent. You guys are talking my language, right? There's a hand there in the back right there in the white shirt. I'm sorry, I don't know your names. If you want to say your names, go ahead.
Like making sure that your work with like different animals and plants doesn't like disrupt other like predators or prey of that animal, and like ecosystems stay intact.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely right. So science in and of itself is agnostic, right? It is normatively neutral, but it has impacts. Unless we think about these questions before we start down a path of science, we could end up with what are called unintended consequences, or people taking scientific questions and misusing them, right? So the issue of eugenics, right, we're talking about, actually a number of you mentioned this, right? They kind of all talking about similar points, right? This came out of work done by Darwin and his understanding of genetics and natural selection that was misused and transferred over to societal questions in terms of who made up the fit and who were not the fit. And as a result of that, who should survive and thrive and who should not, who should be subjected to either euthanasia completely or forced sterilization, right? These are all outcomes of scientific research, right? When society kind of changes things, right? The point that was made before, right? The disrupting ecosystems that we did not intend to disrupt because we had some other objective in mind, right? So this is the risk of not having ethics in our sciences, right? We could go down a scientific path and then reach an end point that we never intended to reach. All right, we could just skip ahead on these. We defined these before. Doing good, justice. Okay, right. So talking on about this point again. So ethics has always had a valuable place in the sciences, right? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, all the STEM fields. And it's increasingly being looked at as a central part of these conversations, right? It's not enough to just pursue science. We need to understand what the societal implications of this research is all about, right? And the most important questions that are going to come out of scientific practice is not actually what's going to be happening in the lab or at a workstation. It's how these questions are going to impact societies and communities for years to come. And this is now being pursued on an increasing basis, right? So there are STEM curricula across the country that are being designed. The one that Dr. Rafaelovich mentioned before at the start of the class, right? A holistic approach to scientific ethics. What this means, right? We're not just talking about, whether or not it's okay to cheat on a test, which we all know is not okay to do that. But there are greater questions, even more important questions about what the impact of our science actually looks like and what these things look like. How is our research going to be felt far beyond the confines of the laboratory walls? What risks might our work cause for sustainability measures, environmental concerns, right? Ecological, ecosystems, that kind of thing. How do we minimize risks and maximize benefits, both from an environmental standpoint, from a human impact standpoint? Do things have a societal or an economic impact that we need to be thinking about? Are we creating products now that future generations are going to have to reckon with, think about, deal with in some kind of adverse way. Okay, so just really quickly, when we think about these questions, we're often thinking about two key issues. Sustainability, right, which is essentially making sure that there is a world to move forward into, to live into, right, to create and to maintain conditions that are livable for humans and for nature, that we live in a harmonious world moving forward, right? Right now, we're dealing with a lot of challenges that test this very question of sustainability, what the future is going to look like and how we need to address it. And then social justice, right? These two issues go hand in hand, right? When you're talking about a lack of sustainability, is going, that question is going to be borne on the backs of different people in a disproportionate way, right? So social justice and sustainability are two issues that go hand in hand, right? So things like environmental catastrophes, they have a disproportionate effect on poor communities, poorer parts of the world, as opposed to others, developed regions. Things like deforestation and desertification make access to resources more difficult for those who rely on those resources to begin with. Create all sorts of social barriers, conflicts, wars that are being fought right now because of a lack of access to natural resources, because of interventions that are human-made. Right, all of these things are the applied ethical questions that I think are fascinating, that have human rights implications to them, and where we should really be placing our attention. All right. So we're going to think about some of these things and talk about them, how they're applied to scientific questions. All right. So the first one we're going to talk about and think about is the issue of neuroenhancement. All right, so non-invasive brain stimulation techniques such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, which some of you might know about, that uses the principles of electromagnetic induction to focus currents on the brain, are now commercially available for non-medical improvement, such as memory and cognition boosting. Brain stimulation devices are most commonly used in the treatment for various neurological and behavioral conditions, but the same technology can be used to enhance the human brain beyond its natural abilities. So an example, a company called Focus is currently selling a transcranial direct stimulation, current stimulation headset engaged to increase the plasticity of your brain, making synapses fire faster so customers can improve their gaming skills. So far, research shows these techniques to be low risk. All right, what do we think about this? What are some of the things that we should be thinking about?
Anybody? Looking first for someone who hasn't said anything?
Yeah, I want to hear from as many of you as possible. Yep, yeah, and then, yeah.
If they have so many resources to be able to create this like amazing technology in the brain, they could use these resources towards more passive problems. The technology to apply to people with disabilities and other kinds that don't have access to
Fantastic. All right. So we can approach this question from a societal prioritization standpoint. How are we prioritizing the resources that we have? Are we properly valuing this technology as opposed to, for instance, other interventions that could benefit people's lives, especially people who maybe don't have much attention given to them? Excellent.
I think it worsens the socioeconomic divide because the people who can afford to get these things are the people who
like are richer, and so it kind of worsens that divide, and so these people will have even more benefit and an even better position in life than they already did.
Excellent, excellent, right? So there is a socioeconomic question deeply embedded in this, right? That some people, those people who are going to be able to afford this technology or these interventions are already ones who have privilege and benefits associated to them. Are they now going to be able to have cognitive better benefits, cognitive advantages that other people won't be able to have purely because they don't have the resources to purchase them? Excellent. Yeah, we can go right across these three.
What?
I think that's three hands there right in the
Three
middle.
hands. Okay. Sorry. Pass the road.
Yeah,
I feel like for the socioeconomic divide question, any technological improvements we have are going to go to those with access first. So there's no reason we shouldn't further ourselves, but like making sure that it's accessible to people who it wouldn't be so easily accessible to could help lessen that divide. But like that's no reason for us to not further ourselves and to help, enhance our abilities and whatnot.
all right. So the argument is essentially there's always going to be this divide. There's always going to be greater access for some as opposed to others. So we might as well continue to move forward while thinking about how we can make these interventions or these advances as accessible to everybody.
I think the difference with this technology is that it can literally provide a biological advantage, which while currently there are like social advantages to being, for example, wealthier, but this provides a direct biological advantage, which changes the game completely. And I think on top of that, this also raises a very slippery slope as to if we can literally make people smarter, what can't we change about humans? And so I think the idea of playing God and how much control we have over our own biology and capabilities comes into question again, because what lengths will we go to if we're willing to do this?
Fantastic, right? So we're not just talking about who has access to the next Xbox. We're talking about something much broader, much more integrated into who we are as individuals and who we are as human beings. And we're not just talking about who has some kind of gaming equipment. We're talking about something that changes the face of humanity, and that shouldn't be borne out on socioeconomic lines. Absolutely. I think there's a hand over there too. Oh, first, and then we'll go over to you.
To add to that, this interferes with a person's thinking, which could interfere in a way with somebody's sense of self. And perhaps a line needs to be drawn on how much we can really interfere with that process.
Sure, of course. So this is, we don't have a full understanding of what these interventions might do to somebody. Are we talking about fundamentally changing somebody's identity? Are we talking about changes that are that cannot be unchanged? What are the consequences of this? Are we potentially breeding a new strain of humanity that we did never anticipate? And what is that going to look like? What is the future going to be for them and for us?
Yeah, so moving back to the socioeconomic access standpoint, when you think about it, when there are more people who are able to use it, over time it'll become more accessible, and there could even be more technological advancements from more people using it and from market opening up, right? So from that standpoint, if we start going towards neuroenhancement, it could lead to more accessibility in the future, and that is a possibility that we've seen throughout history.
Sure, right. So as things become more generally used, more people will ultimately benefit, right? Yeah. So economies of scale, that's essentially what that argument is, right? So that as we produce more and more of these technologies and interventions, they become more broadly used and more people will benefit. Sure, one more, and then we'll go ahead to the next one.
Personally, I think that the slippery slope is the biggest issue, but I also think that in terms of the idea of something that can change the way your brain thinks, that itself is sold with a profit motive. It's the idea that this product could influence you to buy more of that company's product. It is changing your fundamental behavior, especially because it's sold with the purpose of making money for the company.
Sure. So what is the incentive for this company, right? That's one of the things and one of the principles that we're talking about. Who benefits from this? This technology is not necessarily designed for altruistic human betterment purposes, right? There is a profit motive that's driving this technology, not necessarily with people's well-being in mind. Absolutely something very important to think about, right? We're not always developing and innovating purely for altruistic or socially beneficial reasons. Excellent. Really, so these are the kinds of questions that we should be thinking about when we talk about things like ways to enhance human beings. All right. AI, right? An issue that's really hot, really important to start thinking about, right? So for decades, artificial intelligence or AI was the engine of high-level STEM research. Most consumers became aware of the technology's power and potential through internet platforms like Google and Facebook and Amazon. But today, AI is essential across a vast array of industries, including things like healthcare, banking, retail, manufacturing, things that we don't necessarily always associate with technology. But its game-changing promise to do things like improve efficiency, bring down costs, and accelerate research and development has been tempered of late with worries that these complex, opaque systems may do more societal harm than economic good. With virtually no US government oversight, private companies use AI software to make determinations about health and medicine, employment, creditworthiness, and even criminal justice without having to answer for how they're ensuring that the programs are encoded consciously or unconsciously with structural biases. All right, so what's going on here? What is all this gobbledygook mean? What are we talking about? What are some of the questions that are coming out of really important technological advances? I think there's a hand there in the back.
Especially in the field of scientific research, like
Sure, absolutely, right? So advances that come out of AI, things like generative AI or language learning models, right? Things like ChatGPT and other platforms, right? There's a lot of questions in terms of who is creating knowledge, right? So journal publications become the mechanism by which knowledge that is created in the lab or in any kind of research institution is distributed and disseminated across the world and across other scientific enterprises. If we don't know who's creating these journal publications or writing these articles is created by technology, who is actually building knowledge? Who is building our sense of reality? Absolutely, big question.
For like AI that used for like artistic purposes, there are a lot of concerns going on with like collections of data for those AIs because artists are now considering those that some of the companies are collecting artists' work just in the internet and collecting it without consent, which people are having a lot of concerns in, and there is a problem of privacy, and that's maybe why that is mostly the limitation of current AI development, because people can't get enough data, but at the same time we also need to consider the privacy on top of it.
Excellent, very good point, right? So today, literally today, US senators are hearing testimony from ethicists, scientists, all sorts of people who are interested in these questions about how to regulate AI, what its implications are for things like national security, for things like making sure that people are not disproportionately treated, that we're going to build AI models, reflections of society that are justice-based, that are not going to exhibit the very same biases that are found in society, whether it's related to race, whether it's related to gender, whether it's related to ability, all of these things which are deeply embedded in society are now being outsourced to artificial intelligence to try to decide. All right, so some of the questions that are coming out of it, the evolution of AI, right, has grown so quickly in sophistication because of more powerful computers and compilation of anonymous data sets. Machine learning can sort massive amounts of data extremely quickly and can learn over time. It's used often in hiring practices. AI can scan people's resumes very quickly, looking for keywords, looking for key ideas, and as a result, omitting many potential applicants purely because they don't have the right words in their resumes. And one of the questions that is coming out of this kind of line of research is, can smart machines outthink human beings? And if that's the case, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do if we have a machine that is smarter, faster, more capable than the human being? How do we stop it from propagating on its own? What do we do if we start creating things like, born right out of the Marvel movies, super soldiers? How does that change the game in the world? Who is affected disproportionately as opposed to those who are less affected? How do we integrate things like social biases? How do we anticipate problems like deep fakes? Right, so the creation of photos and videos that make people, that have people appearing to be doing something that they were never doing. And how do we create objectivity in critical decision making? You'll land. All right, so we'll do one more because I know we're already run over time. All right, so this, who knows? Well, I guess you know what this movie is. It says right at the bottom of the movie, The Martian. What's going on in this movie? Who can give me a little synopsis or give everybody a synopsis?
Okay, I forgot the character's name, but like whoever Matt Damon plays, he gets stuck on Mars, and then everybody's like trying to get him to like get back to Earth, and he also grows potatoes on Mars.
He also grows potatoes. All right, that's true. That's true. Yeah. All right. That's basically the gist, right? So he ends up on Mars. He gets left behind. All right. He needs to figure out how to survive there. All right. So like I said before, ethics applies to all aspects of science. Astronauts and astronautics is no exception, right? You would never really think about that, right? It's not something that's often thought about together, but it is an extremely important question, right? So there are plans for long-term space missions and the colonization of Mars that's already underway. So coming up in upcoming years, NASA has launched the Orion spacecraft, and NASA administrators declared that day one of the Mars era has already started. The company Mars One, along with Lockheed Martin and Surrey Satellite Technology, is planning to launch a robotic mission to Mars soon, with humans following soon thereafter. 418 men and 287 women from around the world are currently vying for spots on the first one-way human settlement mission. What do you think about that?
There comes the question of why we're pouring so many valuable resources into something like this when so many here are struggling to such an extent, because only, the richer are going to be settling on Mars, whereas there are millions and millions of impoverished who are barely living on Earth.
Phenomenal, right? So this question was highly circulated around the time when people like Elon Musk and what's his face, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, right, were allowing people to buy seats on their rockets, right? Is this a justifiable use of resources, and expenditure and human intellectual capital? Should we be investing that much time and resources to allow people to go for a joyride to the outside the atmosphere and come back down? Is that it? And there are people who would argue, yes, that is perfectly justified. That is what the capitalist system allows for. That's how we have built the United States. That's fine. There are many others who would take a very oppositional perspective and say, wait a second, there are people who are suffering tremendously, people who are living in conditions of poverty, and we shouldn't be investing these kinds of resources for something that is frivolous. And the same thing can be applied in this situation. Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
I think when it comes to space exploration, there's also the question of how we use resources, because right now there's virtually no laws on limiting how we use resources from space. So do we continue exploiting other planets just as we have done to Earth? And are there any, there are virtually no rules right now preventing us from doing that. And right now, the wealthy would be able to escape, the havoc we've wreaked on our own planet, while the poor are left to deal here with the after effects of global warming, things like that.
Phenomenal, right? So this is the social degradation argument, right? That it has largely been the global north, the richer countries that have created this climate crisis that we're in right now, and they're going to be the ones most able to exit the earth, leaving everybody else behind to suffer the consequences of a catastrophic situation of their own creation. Is that just? Is that fair? Just as you mentioned, there are no laws regulating that. Wherever people land, there is no law, there's no legal system where they will land, right? They will be arriving at a location where they have to create their own government, right? Have to work out their own ways of living. Is that a justifiable thing to do for children who are born to these people? Maybe they don't want to live on a planet that has no civilization. Is that a just thing to do to a child who didn't have any say in the matter? Right? These are all really important questions that come out of issues that we think we don't often think deeply enough about. All right, I know that we have already run far over time, but I want to harken back on the point that Dr. Rafaelovich had mentioned at the beginning of the session. These are the questions that I think are really important for future scientists to be thinking about. And I want to work with as many of you who are interested in tackling some of these ethical questions on whatever avenue of scientific exploration you are interested in, even if it's not what you're studying in the lab. If you're interested in some other scientific ethical question, go for it. Find a question that you are interested in, do some research on it, come up with an argument about how you feel about it and why that's the right ethical perspective to take. And then at the end of the session, we'll do a little symposium of what you have found and publishing these works in the journal.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
wonderful.
you guys.
Thank you. And Jessica will run a session and we'll Zoom with you.
Fantastic. Yeah, if you're interested in doing this, please give your name to Jessica, and then we will move forward on that. You guys were a brilliant, fantastic conversation. It is always such a delight to talk to you guys, but this year in particular, you have touched on some really critically important points. So kudos to all of you. I can't wait to work with you.
Thank you very, very much. And yes, Jessica will start a sign-up sheet for people interested, and you can also put the topic that you'd like to address, and there may be other topics that Professor Ellison will suggest for you to investigate. Thank you. All right. So we're going to continue now with our science program, which seems now to be either tremendously important because it has all these other questions behind it, or somewhat not so global because we're only looking at one specific topic. But I think the take-home lesson is that a painting is built out of many little strokes. And when you look back, you see the entirety of what it is. So in this lab in science, we are making the little strokes, and we just have to make sure that the painting that comes out is really beautiful and worthwhile, like you heard just now. So again, thank you. Can I have a- Brooke? Other technical projects that we're going to have. And if Alex yeah, Alex is here, come. Alex and Hugh Rochard. One of the projects that they will be doing, if you want to say a few words.
Sure. So my project is works hand in hand with Dr. Brooke Ellison, where the main goal is to improve the quality of life for quadriplegics. And we can go into different types of paralysis, but we originally started by making a camera system for Dr. Brooke Ellison. And I think this summer we're going to lead into reverse engineering some of the technology that she used to use to incorporate it back into her reality again.
Yes, so that the TTK enables us to you and to write and to do everything around her is a technology that she really has mastered, and it's quite amazing. So we would like to bring it in to the Bluetooth era and to have it compatible with an iPad, for example, so that things such as is really a technology of the past. They should really be something that's completely seamless and that's done. And that's what they'll be working with Professor Milutin from electrical engineering. And we'll Zoom with him tomorrow. He's in Serbia right now, but we'll have a Zoom with him on it. Again, thank you very much.
It's great. It's such an honor to work with all of you. And this is an example of applied science and applied ethics, you know, how the innovation that we create and that develop has a practical and tremendously impactful effect on people's lives. I know that that is the truth. I am the beneficiary of a lot of scientific and technological innovation and intervention that has changed my life fundamentally. And so I owe science and technology a tremendous debt of gratitude. And I hope you guys don't underappreciate the role that you can play in people's lives. So this is an example of that.
Thank you. Okay, so continuing our mission in science, back to the lab. First, I'm going to have Professor Sokolov speak on DNA,